right. I am right about that. You are wasting your life. As an occasional supplement to your life, maybe, I mean, I don't do it, but I'm not going to hold that against anyone, and I still want to love my wife. But as an all-consuming part of your life, that's not as good as someone who, like, I don't know, thinks about something besides trivia with their friends. That is a good part of human nature. We're calling it aristocratic, but it's the desire to be better. Doesn't disappear in democracy. And maybe we should try to appreciate it. But Hawthorne teaches us that, not through the character of the judge or the colonel, but through these other members of the Pynchon family, Clifford and Phoebe. Okay, so let's talk about Clifford. Clifford, insofar as I'm able to discern this book, okay, is the best aristocrat. As I say, he's not reproducing. He's old. But what is so great about Clifford? He loves beauty. He loves the beautiful. When he looks at Hepzibah, he throws up in his mouth. But he cannot spend enough time with Phoebe. Right? But his love has been thwarted over the course of his life. He's been a romantic. He's a romantic, a great lover of things. And if Clifford had been allowed to live his life, he would have been perfectly harmless, but someone who appreciated and might have sustained this wonderful and beautiful house. Someone who may have even improved it, gotten someone to fix up the garden and to keep the estate nice, trim the hedges. Clifford is promise, right? The aristocratic promise. Someone who can have leisure and use it well. The other Pynchon that holds out promise in this respect, and I think everyone has noticed this, listening to both the recording of the discussion groups and being in a discussion group the other day, I think everyone grasps this pretty well, is that Phoebe is also, holds out the possibility of being a true lady. And by that we mean beautiful, graceful, elegant, mannerly, caring, sympathetic, reproducing, fecund would be the word there, I think, right? Yeah. Fecund. She's half a member of the family. By being a true lady, I think Hawthorne means that she is not, it's not based on birth, like Hepzibah or family, but it represents the best a woman can be. I think that's what he's getting at with Phoebe. She's related to the family, and maybe her elegance and grace come somewhat from the bearing that one might get from one's family. but it's natural in her, as opposed to being based on aristocratic conventions. What is the best facial expression you can get out of Hepzibah? What is she known for?
Scowl.
The scowl. What is Phoebe known for? Her beautiful smile. Right? Turn that frown upside down, Hepzibah. You got Phoebe. What's that? And 40 years off. And probably 100 pounds. So we have these, like, if we made a continuum up here, we'd have the most aristocratic characters being obsolete in some way. Colonel Pynchon. Judge Pynchon is a more democratic character, but like underneath the near Colonel Pynchon is Clifford. If Clifford had to live in a modern democracy, he'd be a completely useless person. Completely useless. He just loves the beautiful. He loves leisure and knows how to do something well in it. He's not a worker. He's not even recreation guy. He's a thinker and an appreciator of the finer things. Do you have any Grey Poupon? As the old commercial went. The kind of guy who would appreciate Grey Poupon. Whereas everyone else, squirt bottles. Yellow mustard. He's a Grey Poupon guy in a yellow mustard world. Do you know what that means? There's an old commercial where a Rolls Royce, where an old line Rolls Royce is there, and another Rolls Royce pulls up next to him, and they roll down the window, and the other one rolls down the window, and the guy from the first Rolls Royce looks at the guy from the second Rolls Royce, and he says, "Would you have any Grey Poupon?" And the guy from the second Rolls Royce says back, "But of course." And he hands him Grey Poupon. See, this is high living. Grey Poupon. That's the, anyways.
I remember that commercial.
You had to be there.
No, I don't know. We can show the commercial on there. Does anyone? Has no one ever
Probably
seen
on
this
you-
commercial?
I've seen it,
Just
yes.
only people
Yeah.
at a certain age. It's the democratic view. It's a mustard. Oh, I'm sorry. That you'd have to know. That's very fine, expensive mustard. It's very good. Kind of like Perrier water used to be. They used to be kind of a big deal. Now everyone's got a little plastic thing of it. Yeah. Just erase that in your memory. Holgrave is the opposite end of the spectrum. Okay? Holgrave is the democratic guy in the book, the one who wants to wipe the slate clean, the Blithedale. He's the Puritan of the novel, even though he's not a Puritan. I think someone in one of the groups called him a hippie. That's good enough for government work. That's true. But what we mean by that, by comparing to the Puritan, is that he's someone who has a vision of perfection and believes that he can institute it in the world and remove the obstacles that exist in the world to it. So the crucial thing is that he believes in perfection on earth. Okay, so he's a Puritan, even though he's a hippie. In one of our groups, we read some of the characteristics of Holgrave, and I want who is going to read this section on 126 for me? Mr. Brady was extracting a benefit for doing it, but maybe we won't do. Maybe he won't demand the benefit. We're going to get to that in a second.
I just asked what it's worth.
The pure joy of serving the class.
It's not worth much.
He's had lots of jobs. We see Holgrave has had lots of jobs, which means he has no character. He can change jobs, change fundamental views on the drop of a button. We know, and another way of saying that he opposes character or has no character is that he opposes permanence and embraces equality. We're going to see, and we're going to read this in a second, he's a hoper and a changer. He sees the family as oppressive, property as oppressive. But just to give you an idea, that this is not an old or distinctly American or even necessarily modern view. This is a democratic view. Okay, this is from Plato's Republic. Plato wrote before America existed as a country.
No.
He was a Greek thinker. And his book, The Republic, is about justice. And later on in The Republic, in Book 8, he describes various regimes. Democracy is the last one he describes. He starts with the best regime, and he goes to democracy, oligarchy, democracy, and then ultimately tyranny. So I guess it's not the worst regime. Tyranny is worse than democracy. And he describes the way people live in democracies. Okay? And what it is a perfect description of Holgrave. 230, this is in Book 8, 239, page 239, the Bloom translation. Doesn't he, the democratic man, go back again to the lotus eaters and openly settle among them? And if some help should come to the stingy element of his soul from relatives, those boasting speeches close the gates of the kingly wall within him. They neither admit the auxiliary force itself, nor do they receive an embassy of speeches of older private men. But doing battle, they hold sway themselves. And naming shame, simplicity, they push it out with dishonor, a fugitive. Calling moderation cowardliness and splattering it with mud, they banish it. Persuading that measure and orderly expenditure are rustic and illiberal, they join with many useless desires in driving them over the frontier. Now they have emptied and purged these from the soul of the man they are seizing and initiating in great rites. They proceed to return insolence, anarchy, wastelessness, shamelessness from exile, and in a blaze of light, crowned and accompanied by numerous choruses, extolling and flattering them by calling insolence good education. Anarchy is called freedom, wastefulness, magnificence, and shamelessness is called courage. Isn't it in some such way that a man when he is young changes from his rearing in necessary desires to the liberation and unleashing of unnecessary and useless pleasures? And from there, Socrates goes on to describe how the democratic man changes jobs by the hour. Right? This is what Holgrave seems to represent. Okay, the democratic man, the man who can make the world anew and give everyone a home in it. Now I want us to look at Mr. Brady, this is your cue here. I want us to look at these passages from the end of chapter 12, which is the end of our reading for today, where he talks about his vision for hope and change. Go ahead.
Shall we never get rid of this past, cried he, keeping up the earnest tone of his preceding conversation. It lies upon the present like a giant's dead body. In fact, the case is just as if a young giant were compelled to waste all his strength in carrying about the corpse of the old giant, his grandfather, who died a long while ago, and only needs to be decently buried. Just think a moment, and it will startle you to see what slaves we are to bygone times, to death, if we give the matter a right word. But I do not see it, observed Phoebe. For example, then, continued Holgrave, a dead man, if he happened to have made a will, disposes of wealth he no longer his own, or, if he died intestate, it is distributed in accordance with the notions of men much longer dead than he. A dead man sits on all our judgment seats, and living judges do but search out and repeat his decisions. We read in dead men's books, we laugh at dead men's jokes, and cry at dead men's pathos. We are sick of dead men's diseases, physical and moral, and die of the same remedies which with dead doctors killed their patients. With which, whatever. We worship the living deity according to dead men's forms and creeds. Whatever we seek to do of our own free motion, a dead man's icy hand obstructs us. Turn our eyes to what point we may, a dead man's white, immitigable face encounters them and freezes our very heart. And we must be dead ourselves before we can begin to have our proper influence on our own world, which will then be no longer our world, but the world of another generation, with which we shall have no shadow of a right to interfere. I ought to have said, too, that we live in dead men's houses, as, for instance, in this of the Seven Gables. And why not, said Phoebe, so long as we can be comfortable in them. But we shall live to see the day, I trust, went on the artist, when no man shall build his house for prosperity. Why should he? He might just as reasonably order a durable suit of clothes, leather, or get a percha, or whatever else lasts longest, so that his great-grandchildren should have the benefit of them, and cut precisely the same figure in the world that he himself does. If each generation were allowed and expected to build its own houses, that single change, comparatively unimportant in itself, would imply almost every reform which society is now suffering for. I doubt whether even our public edifices, our capitals, state houses, courthouses, city halls, and churches, ought to be built of such permanent materials as stone or brick. It were better that they should crumble to ruin once in 20 years or thereabouts, as a hint to the people to examine into and reform the institutions which they symbolize.
Let's just stop right there. All right, so that's an obvious reference to Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson has said that every 19 years the tree of liberty needs to be watered with the blood of patriots and tyrants, and who endorsed the idea that the Constitution itself should be up for re-ratification every generation or so. And so the house is a metaphor for everything in society, Holgrave says. Permanence suggests that we're slaves to the past. We should open up every vista for reevaluation to see if those institutions that we have formed in previous generations continue to serve us. We need a living Constitution, not a dead one. Having houses, I mean, imagine what would happen. This would be a very interesting experiment, right? Capitol buildings. Most Capitol buildings in the United States are built on some sort of Roman model. That is, they're supposed to be noble, statuesque, old-looking, and hence induce from the population a certain kind of reverence for the nobility of those things. So what if we had them implode every 19 years? And every current generation could design the buildings that the current generation wants? We'd get a bunch of buildings that look like the ILC. Right, or the Ed building. The Ed building is 1970s Stalinist architecture. Architecture. Did I say Stalinist? I did.
Yeah.
Just snuck in there. And no, Stalin would never have built a building like that. The ILC is today's Stalinist not Stalinist, but today's architecture. Right? I mean, if you did it every 19 years, we could invent an education, a new education for the 20th century or the 20th century in 12 years. Every 19 years, we could just change what everything is on the university. We could change what knowledge is. Everything needs to be up for grabs. What Holgrave is going after here is the family and the house and the stability that those things afford. But he might just as well say, we can run up a debt. We're living for now. Right? That's the key part. He's against permanence. You don't do anything worried about what the effect is going to be in the future, and you don't do it to be a slave to the past. This is a big desire on his part to remake the world, expunge the past, abolish the private home, abolish the family. And why? Why does this aspiration, I'm calling it democratic, make sense? Well, he's a believer in progress. And progress unhinged or unmitigated means that previous ages are ages of darkness, whose ways obviously are not adequate to our current needs. Of course, Holgrave reminds us again of Plato. When Socrates in the Republic builds the best regime in speech, one of the prerequisites for that best regime ever happening is that everyone over 10 must be chased out of the political community because they are slaves to particular ways of thinking. People who are 10 are still moldable, changeable. If we can get our hands on them early and make sure their parents don't get their hands on them, we can make the world better. This is Holgrave's aspiration. A better world. And what is Hawthorne's account of this? I think the lesson Hawthorne wants us to learn through Holgrave is that democratic erasing is based on resentment. It's unhealthy. It's inhuman. Why does Holgrave want to erase the past? And why does he use the house as a way of illustrating the point? Because he's a Maul, we later learn. That is, he's a member of the family whose property has been stolen by the colonel. It's his resentment of that act of injustice, and I'm not disputing its injustice, that continues to govern his soul. He seeks to remedy it. Democratic leveling is motivated in part by legitimate resentment. It's unhealthy. We're going to see that Holgrave changes his view and recognizes that any critique of permanence cannot give an account of his genuine feelings and love for Phoebe. Maybe the family wouldn't be such a bad thing if you met Phoebe. And it's a well-known fact that the Friends character is modeled on this literary person. We could go into all the allusions of that deep show. Human nature remains, in other words. And Holgrave, like the big movement of the novel is Holgrave's movement toward the Pynchon family, which happens mostly in the last third of the novel, which is what we're going to turn to in discussion section and in lecture next Tuesday. So before we leave, does anyone have any questions, critiques, desires for clarification, motions to adjourn? Any questions? We have 5 minutes, so let's take it.
In which chapter does Phoebe sing Smelly Cat to Clifford?
I don't have my edition here. All right, well, I'll take that as a testament to my unparalleled clarity as a lecturer. We'll see you in the discussion group.